Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be making a tier list of all of the Mythical Island EX cards. I've been meaning to get this video out earlier, but I definitely want to get it out before Spacetime Smackdown comes out. And yes, I have played with and against each of these cards a considerable amount of times, so there won't be any mistakes made this time around. And now we have Arcanine EX. A very disappointing card.
3 days later.
I think our opponent wasn't the best player, but regardless, I think we would have won that anyways, even if they did play it correctly. And that's just the pure power of Arcanine EX. So without further ado, let's get into this ranking. Now, one last thing before we get into it, I am kind of ranking these not just based among themselves, but based among the entire meta in general. So other cards, meta decks, and play styles from Genetic Apex will be considered in this ranking. Now we're gonna get started with Celebi EX, the poster child, I guess you can say, of Mythical Island. Even though Mew is on the pack art, I have to say I think Celebi really just took this entire set by storm. And I mean, it is a fantastic card. It's very fun to play with. It's also pretty easy to play with as well. The main strategy is getting Superior on your bench and getting energy on Celebi. That's literally it. So Celebi EX relies on coin flips. And if you know anything about me from my previous videos, I don't really like coin flips. But when you have a Superior on the bench, it doesn't really matter. And I mean, 2 energy is the bare minimum that you'd want to put on this card. If you have 3 energy on it and you have a Superior on your bench, you're most likely going to win the game. It's very hard to lose after that point, especially if you have another Celebi on the bench. So contrary to my personal play style, I've been playing Celebi EX a lot. I came up with my very own deck utilizing Chat Op for draw, and I've been using that deck ever since Mythical Island came out. In the current meta, I think Celebi EX is an S tier card, and I am going to put it in S-. It does have some flaws. Sure, there is always the probability that you won't roll heads. There's also a big probability that you won't get your Superior set up. But even if you don't get your Superior set up, it's still very easy to put out big damage with a Celebi EX. But I think the main thing that it falls short on is its HP. 130 is very low, especially for a EX card. I understand it's a basic card. It's a small little fairy. It shouldn't have a lot of HP, and I get that. If it had more HP than 130, it would probably be OP. So I think that's what makes it balanced. Regardless, really solid card, really fun to play with, and if you're going up against the Celebi EX, which I know a lot of y'all have, you know how annoying it can be. Now we're moving on to Gyarados EX. Now Gyarados EX has been seeing a lot of meta play, and rightfully so. It's a 1-stage Pokemon that has 180 HP, and it also does 140 damage for 4 energy. Its added effect from its attack isn't really all that crazy. If you have your Gyarados EX set up and it's in the active position, it doesn't matter if you're the one losing the energy, because you're probably not going to need another card to play from that point. Now 140 damage isn't a lot, but I think the big factor of Gyarados is that it's 1 stage and it has an insanely high HP. It can tank a lot of hits. The only Pokemon that really gives it a tough time is Charizard EX, which we all know it's good. It's just kind of hard to set up. With cards like Misty and Vaporeon, this card is actually pretty easy to use, even though you need 4 energy total for it. How I personally play Gyarados EX is with support from Starmie and Vaporeon. Now I get Starmie EX in the active position set up dealing damage. And as long as I have 2 energy attached to Gyarados, whether I attach it myself or through Misty, I can just retreat Starmie for no retreat cost and then get all that energy up to Gyarados EX, and it's pretty much game over after that. It's one of the top meta decks out right now, and rightfully so. It's a very good card. Its only real weakness is the fact that Magikarp is so weak and is easily sniped. I've had plenty of situations where I had a Magikarp with 3 energy on it and it just gets sniped out of my bench. And I just can't play the Gyarados EX because I can't draw it. Now that situation doesn't happen too often, but it is still a possibility. And if that's the only real downside to this card, it's an S tier card, and I'm gonna put it in S+ tier. I think it is the best card to come out of Mythical Island. It could be right now, I mean before Spacetime Smackdown, it could be the best card out all together on Pokemon TCG Pocket. I don't know if that's a crazy take or not, but that's just my opinion, and I have thoroughly thought it out. I have a feeling you guys will never let down my Arcanine EX rating. Anyways, we have Mew EX, the actual poster child of Mythical Island. It's on the pack art, so you'd expect this to be a really good card that you can just solo in your deck and build around, when in fact it's more so a support card. Now, you most commonly see Mew EX and Mewtwo EX decks. The playstyle is, if your Mewtwo EX gets knocked out, put in your Mew EX. That's literally it. A lot of it is banking on your opponent having decent attacks, which most often is the case, but there are a lot of situations where, you know, your opponent has attacks with effects that only apply to their deck, not yours. Like relying on poison or relying on your opponent's Pokemon being an EX or not. It can be very situational. I've tried out plenty of Mew EX decks where Mew is the focus of the deck, and it just doesn't really work out that well. I don't really see a good win percentage. I tried it with Druddigon, I tried it with Greninja, I even tried it on its own with Gardevoir. And in my opinion, I don't think it can be the sole star of a deck. I think it's a fantastic bench piece. I think it's a fantastic second option. It can even be used as an early game shield with Budding Explorer. There's plenty of situations, especially early game, where your opponent can deal a lot of damage to your Mew EX and you can just simply get it back into your hand. It's also a very free way to switch in a card that you've been building up on your bench, similar to Koga. So that gives it a lot of functionality, but again, if you're building around a Mew EX and you want Mew EX to be your main card in your deck, and you use that card, Budding Explorer, you're gonna lose all the energy attached to your Mew EX, which could potentially be 3 energy if you're using the Mew EX to its full potential, and that could set you back a lot. So with all that being said, I think Mew EX is a solid card. I don't think it can be a main card of a deck. I'm going to put it in B neutral. There's not really anything wrong with it, but there's not really anything extraordinary for it as well. Moving on to Aerodactyl EX. Now, I think it's safe to say that Aerodactyl EX is the worst EX card to come out of Mythical Island. For 2 energy, it does 80 damage, and that's pretty decent, and it's only a 1-stage Pokemon. But the main thing going for this card is its ability, which prevents your opponent's active spot Pokemon from evolving. Now, there are situations where this could really mess up your opponent's playstyle, especially if they can't pull another card and they're stuck with like a Pidgey or a Charmander in their active position. That could quite literally cost them the game immediately, but that's very situational. For the most part, how most meta decks are played, a lot of the evolution happens on the bench. With Celebi EX, you're evolving your superior on the bench. Same goes for cards like Greninja. Okay, now let's talk about 2-stage Pokemon that need to be in the active position to win you the game. Well, with Charizard EX, you're still building that on your bench. You're using Moltres to build up energy while evolving it, so Aerodactyl doesn't really have an effect on that card. And further looking into the meta, Gardevoir goes unaffected with this ability, same with Gyarados and even Arcanine. So the only real way of getting the most out of this ability is if you get lucky on your opponent's like pulls from their deck, and crossing your fingers that they are running a 2-stage Pokemon, and it just so happens that that's the only Pokemon that they have in their active spot, and they can't pull anything else to get it on its bench. There's a lot of possibilities. You'll feel like Doctor Strange in Endgame, where there's only like one clear way to win, and it's very unlikely, and that's how I feel about this card. Now, having this card as a supporter could go a long way, and I can see some success out of this card paired with Lucario coming out of Spacetime Smackdown, but I think they could have done a lot more with this card. How I personally would have brought this card into the meta while keeping it balanced is changing its ability to be, while Aerodactyl EX is in the active spot, none of your or your opponent's Pokemon can evolve. Now, that would be an ability that would mean business. And of course, that ability would make this card too OP, so I'd probably bring its HP down to 130, maybe even 120. And I'll certainly bring its attack down to, at the very most, 160. It could go down to 50 as well. But what do I know? I'm just a nerd making a tier list. Anyways, with all that being said, I'm going to put Aerodactyl in C-. There are situations where this card could really work out, but those situations are slim to none. Now, last but not least, we have Pidgeot EX, who a lot of us kind of overlooked. So it's a 2-stage Pokemon with 170 HP. So for starters, It's a tank, and its main attack does 80 plus damage for each Pokemon on your opponent's bench for 3 energy. And sure, luck plays a factor in this, especially if your opponent kind of catches on that you're running a Pidgeot EX deck, so they simply just don't play cards on their bench, but that kind of leaves them vulnerable and forced to play in a style that they're normally not used to. And also, Mythical Island released accompanying Flute, which directly supports Pidgeot EX. It can do upwards 140 damage, and if you have a Giovanni, it can do 150, which will knock out a Mewtwo EX. And since it's a tank, you can get away with doing 100 or even 80 damage. The most common way I've seen this card played is with a Druddigon in the active spot, dealing passive damage to your opponent's Pokemon while you set it up on the bench. But how I've been personally using it is with a Dugtrio in the active spot. Dugtrio can be really annoying. It'll deal out 40 damage for 1 energy, so you can still focus on building up your Pidgeot, but it can also protect itself from any incoming damage from your opponent, of course, if you flip heads. But what I'm most excited about now is with Space Time Smackdown coming out, Dialga is going to pair so well with Pidgeot EX. I'm super excited to test that combination out. Regardless, I think it's a very solid card in the current meta. It really only has 2 downsides, banking off of your opponent's bench, of course, banking off of the fact if you have accompanying flutes or not, and of course, it being a 2-stage Pokemon, which does take a little bit for it to build up. But I've actually been seeing a lot of success out of Pidgeot EX when I play it, so for that reason, I'm going to put it in A+. I don't think it's quite there yet in the S tier, but it's still a very solid card, and it does see a lot of meta play. Now, Mythical Island was a small set, so these are all the cards that came out. I wouldn't necessarily say any card is bad, but I do think that some cards are just better than others. So yeah, that is my tier list. Let me know how I did in the comments down below. And as always, if you enjoyed this content, make sure you like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.